Right, so creative tax reliefs. The thing we have to do is we have to start with, where did the creative tax relief side concept come from? And that was film. And film came into being really because other countries were already offering tax reliefs to attract Hollywood studios to shoot movies in their country or to help galvanise their own film industry. So the UK felt that it had to implement film tax relief to enable film companies to compete. And from that, we extended to TV, to high-end television, which argued that, of course, they had the same model and were using the same people. And that flowed through into the games industry, which, interestingly enough, was held up by the EU, who wanted to scrutinise whether there was a state aid issue around supporting the games industry used through what was effectively government money. And in fact, the UK government won that case, and games tax relief was implemented. And then that flowed through into theatre, and this is where things got interesting. That because the idea behind theatre was really to, starting with the commercial sector, around the fact they shared investors with film companies. Somebody could choose to invest in film or theatre, so they felt there needed to be an equivalence when it came to theatre. Osborne himself, as I understand it, suggested that this was an opportunity to extend the tax relief out into the subsidised sector, and including within the concept of theatre, opera and ballet. Now, in the context of opera and ballet, there are orchestras. And so already the principle had been established that an orchestra was a qualifying cost in the context of opera and ballet. Indeed, it's a qualifying cost in the context of film and television and games as well, because the producer of the film, TV show or TV production or game can set the cost of commissioning an orchestra to produce the score as a qualifying cost. So orchestras are already in the mix of tax reliefs, just not at that point for the core work they did of putting on concerts. So we felt that, therefore, as soon as theatre tax relief consultation went out, we put in a submission that pointed out the anomaly of leaving concerts out from that picture, and also pointing out that they were possibly creating a problem in that in the context of mixed-use venues, which would have a theatre company coming in one week, dance the next, and then an orchestra, the orchestra wasn't benefiting from tax relief, whereas the other art forms were. And that since we kept hearing this rhetoric that this was a great result for the performing arts, the job wasn't finished. They had to extend to orchestras to fill a gap that had been created. And that argument seemed to press the right buttons. Again, we gather there was some personal interest in this from George Osborne, and he agreed that the logic was to extend it to orchestras, which is why it ended up being announced in the last autumn statement. And has then flowed through into the budget. And as of today, there is the formal response from the Treasury to the consultation, which is good news for orchestras, but also good news for many other musical genres, because the criteria they're now announcing that it's a minimum of 12 players or more, and that it can be one or more from the four main instrument groupings, means that it includes jazz, it includes brass bands, it includes ensemble music making in many different guises. You need to recognise that behind creative tax relief are a couple of fundamental principles. It's about market failure, and it's about inward investment, and by extension it's about jobs and growth. So how do you use creative tax relief as an engine for growth in the UK? Now we could argue in the context of orchestras there is a market failure. That there's a structural deficit inherent in the business of producing concerts, because the ticket revenue that you can recoup on a concert simply cannot match the actual cost of what is a very expensive product. So we had the market failure absolutely nailed down, and the investment too, because by creating a structure whereby there's a sufficient money flowing in to plug that structural deficit makes us able then to seek engagements abroad to give us the ability to compete in a global marketplace, because we are up in competition with orchestras in Germany, France, Italy, the USA, China, Korea, Japan. You know, we're part of that marketplace, and we need that tax system to help us. In terms of it, is it a golden egg or not? It's bureaucratic. There will be a lot of work involved in making it work for orchestras. Some may decide it's too much effort and try to live without it. It will, of course, flow some money back into the orchestral sector, which is good. Not enough to offset the cuts in public investment. But of course, we have to recognise it will be a benefit, and we're really delighted that it's happening. During our negotiations with the Treasury, one thing that came through very clearly was they were absolutely against extending tax relief to rock and pop. This is down to the market failure argument. They do not believe that rock and pop needs a tax break. The line we kept hearing was, we're not giving a tax break to Coldplay. So that was why they were trying to find a mechanism to restrict it in terms of the sorts of musical genre that it can be used for, and they're writing in a specific clause saying it cannot be extended to rock and pop. So that will be a challenge for people who work in the rock and pop business. In terms of the small venues, I suspect though that you could argue there might be some market failure arguments that you can go back to them about if there is this issue around sustaining small music venues, around issues around business rates, whatever. I understand there are some concerns around the sustainability of those small venues, and that's something that you might be able to push the right buttons when it comes to government intervention. And to add one more thing, another key consideration is going back to the fact that this all started with film tax relief. The way the tax relief is predicated is very much on a model where you have production and distribution, and it's the production that qualifies for tax relief, and it's then handed across to the distributor, who then sells the tickets and begins to get income flowing in. That's why it could go from film through to TV, through to games, through to theatre, and through to orchestras, because orchestras have that production model. There's a lot of upfront costs on rehearsal, and then it's handed across to the distributor, which is obviously the main charity, the orchestra itself, that then goes out and sells the tickets. So we could argue that we could easily fit into that structure, and the Treasury will struggle to implement any form of creative tax relief that does not follow that model. So focus on that, production versus distribution, and see how that could apply in the sector that's relevant to you.